Sometime in 1943, a mail clerk in Orlando, Florida, opens another envelope, addressed to nobody in particular, just 3 words, scrawled across the front: Knife Man, Orlando. Inside is a folded bill, a soldier's rank and unit, and a request for a fighting knife to be shipped out to a theater of war thousands of miles away. No return address that meant anything to the postal service. Just enough trust that the letter would somehow find the right workshop. There is no military purchase order attached, no quartermaster's signature, no government contract number. Just one soldier, paying out of his own pocket, because he had seen what another man's blade could do in a fight, and wanted one exactly like it. By the end of the war, letters like that one had arrived by the hundreds, addressed to a one-man knife shop that the United States military never once placed a single official order with. If research like this earns your attention week after week, consider subscribing, and we'd genuinely like to hear your thoughts on this one down in the comments. Why would soldiers across 3 separate theaters of war go around their own quartermasters and pay their own money for a knife the army never approved? Who was the man behind that Orlando address? And why did a request from a single lieutenant in 1942 turn into a demand no small workshop could realistically keep up with? And why, more than 80 years later, does ordering that same knife today still mean waiting 7 years for it to arrive? The man was Walter Doane Randall, Jr., known to nearly everyone simply as Bo. In the summer of 1936, strolling near Walloon Lake in Michigan, on what should have been an unremarkable afternoon, Randall watched a stranger scraping paint off a boat hull with an unusually well-made knife. He was not particularly impressed with how carelessly the man was using such a fine tool, but the knife itself stopped him cold. Its balance, its edge, its sheer functional beauty, completely unlike anything sold in a hardware store. It had been hand-forged by William Skagel, one of the earliest serious custom knife makers in the country, and a man whose name few people outside a small circle of enthusiasts recognized at the time. Randall bought the knife on the spot. That single purchase pulled him into a hobby that, by 1938, had become a small business run out of Orlando, Florida, built entirely on the idea that a knife, made one at a time by a single craftsman, could outperform anything coming off a factory line. On September 13, 1939, he trademarked the 2-line stamp that would eventually appear on tens of thousands of blades. Randall made, Orlando, Florida, framed by a pair of crossed scimitars. His first catalogue went out the following year, just months before the entire world he was selling into would change completely. The timing turned out to be almost accidental in its importance. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the United States entered a global war without a standard-issue military fighting knife in its inventory, relying instead on a mix of older bayonets and whatever combat knives individual units happened to have on hand. Into that gap stepped a lieutenant named Zacharias, who approached Randall directly in June of 1942 with a request for a large, purpose-built fighting knife suited to close-quarters combat in the Pacific Theater. The original order ledger entry from that request survives to this day, still handwritten in Randall's own shop records, specifying Swedish tool steel for the blade. Randall felt the design Zacharias initially wanted ran too large to be practical in an actual fight, and built his own more balanced version instead, a drop-point blade running between 5 and 8 inches depending on the order, ground from 1/4-inch steel stock, fitted with a brass double hilt and a handle built from stacked leather washers, compressed tight enough to survive years of hard use, capped at the end with a lightweight duralumin butt cap that could still take a solid strike if needed. Sized so a soldier could actually carry and use it rather than simply admire it, that knife became the Model 1, the all-purpose fighting knife, and it would go on to define Randall's entire reputation. The Model 1's most distinctive feature was that oversized brass double hilt. In the chaos of a rain-soaked jungle or a frozen European trench, that heavy brass guard gave a soldier's hand an absolute physical stop, keeping his grip from sliding forward onto the blade's razor edge during a forceful thrust, the kind of detail that mattered enormously in the one moment it actually got used. It was a practical, potentially life-saving choice that came directly out of Bo Randall's rejection of the more decorative, less functional civilian hunting knife designs common at the time. Designs built to look good in a display case rather than survive a fight. The steel itself told the same story. Unlike the K-bar or the M3 trench knife, both stamped out of flat steel sheet by the thousands inside massive industrial presses, every Randall blade was born in the coal-fired heat of an actual forge. Bo Randall insisted on hand-forging high-carbon Swedish tool steel, a slower, more deliberate process that properly aligned the internal grain structure of the metal for far greater toughness under repeated hard use in the field. It was a level of metallurgical integrity that no mass-produced government contract weapon of the era could realistically replicate on an assembly line, no matter how many thousands of units that line was capable of stamping out in a single week. Word of mouth did the rest of the work no advertising budget ever could. Soldiers who had served alongside a man carrying a Randall blade came home talking about it, or more often, never came home at all and left the knife behind as a kind of unofficial testimonial passed from one unit to the next. Men shipping out to North Africa, to the European theatre, and across the island chains of the Pacific, increasingly wanted the same thing for themselves. And when they could not find an official supply channel to get one, they simply wrote to Orlando directly and enclosed payment, trusting a stranger they had never met to build them something that might keep them alive. Owning a Randall during the war carried a mark of status nearly as much as it carried a tactical advantage. A standard-issue government knife cost the military only a few dollars to produce, but a hand-forged Randall could run a soldier as much as $30 out of his own pocket, nearly a full month's pay for an army private at the time. It became, in practice, a weapon favored by the officer corps, by elite paratroopers, and by high-altitude bomber crews, men who had both the foresight and the disposable income to buy what amounted to the best insurance a piece of steel could offer, while the average infantryman made do with whatever the government actually issued him for free. Demand grew fast enough that Randall's small shop physically could not keep pace on its own, and he eventually subcontracted a limited run, somewhere around 1,200 knives, to the Northampton Cutlery Company in Springfield, Massachusetts, each one still stamped with the Randall-made mark, even though Bo's own hands never touched the steel on these particular examples. Collectors today refer to these subcontracted pieces as the Springfield Randalls, and among serious collectors of American military-edged weapons, they rank among the most difficult originals to find in verified, unaltered condition, a rarity that grew directly out of a demand one small workshop was never built to satisfy alone. The knife earned its combat reputation the way most good equipment does, through the reputation of the men who actually carried it. General James Gavin, who commanded the 82nd Airborne Division through some of the most demanding airborne operations of the European campaign, including the Normandy landings and the airborne assault into the Netherlands during Operation Market Garden, personally carried a Model 1 throughout the war. That exact knife is preserved today at the West Point Museum, a small, permanent piece of evidence that this was never simply a Florida hobbyist side project, but a tool trusted by one of the most respected combat commanders America produced during the entire war, a man who had every official channel available to him, and still chose a knife nobody in Washington had approved. None of this ever ran through official channels, and that absence is itself the most telling detail in the whole story. The United States military never issued the Randall Model 1 as standard equipment, never placed it on a table of organization, and never paid Bo Randall a single government contract dollar for the thousands of blades that ended up in combat anyway. Every one of them existed because an individual soldier decided it was worth his own money and his own initiative to acquire, a level of grassroots demand that outran anything the Ordnance Department itself was providing through official supply lines. The story did not end when the war did. Roughly 2 decades later, the same small Orlando shop that had once quietly filled mail orders from soldiers in foxholes received an entirely different kind of request, this time from the United States space program. For the Mercury missions of the early 1960s, NASA commissioned Randall to build a specialized survival knife for its astronauts, a compact blade with a hollow handle designed to store fish hooks, matches, and line in case a capsule came down off course, in remote terrain, rather than the intended splashdown zone in the ocean. 7 of these knives were built, one for each of the original Mercury astronauts, each blade etched with its owner's name. Astronaut Alan Shepard carried one aboard Freedom 7 in May of 1961, becoming the first American in space, and 2 of these historic knives now sit in the Smithsonian Institution as some of the earliest tools ever carried beyond Earth's atmosphere. The same hand-forged philosophy that had armed paratroopers dropping into Normandy was, less than 20 years later, riding into orbit strapped to an astronaut's leg. That philosophy never changed, and that may be the strangest part of the entire story. Randall-made knives still operates today, using largely the same handmade process Bo Randall established in his original Orlando shop. And placing an order for a new Model 1 in the present day still means joining a waiting list that currently runs approximately 7 years from deposit to delivery. A knife born out of wartime urgency, built for men who needed something reliable in the space of weeks rather than years, now exists inside a production timeline, slower than almost any other manufactured object a person can still order new. That is the story of a knife the United States government never once purchased in an official capacity, carried into combat anyway by soldiers who paid for it themselves, trusted by a general whose own knife now sits behind museum glass, and still being built today by hand, one at a time, exactly as slowly as it ever was. See you next time, right here, in our next file.